Macbeth had just killed Duncan, and there were knocking at the door. And this is a really important sound in the play, the sound of the knocking. Who's knocking? And I want to give you a little bit of context to understand what's going on here, but um, because this is a great scene and it starts with a really weird bit. And I'm going to post maybe if you want to have a check out of some ways that people do this scene. This is called the porter scene. A porter, of course, is a doorman. Like if you think about port or puerta in Spanish, porto in Latin, it means door. So porter is a doorman. Um, and this is a character that we call the fool or the clown character. You see, Shakespeare's troupe, they would have kind of a set number of actors, and each actor would have a specialty. And so Shakespeare would always write a role for all the different actors. You'd have the leading man, you'd have the older, sort of stately gentleman. That would be probably played by Duncan. Of course, the leading man would be Macbeth. So who played Macbeth would also probably be the guy that played Hamlet and probably the guy who played Othello. You'd have one really great actor who did the leading parts. And then you'd have this guy called the Fool. And if you were interested in learning about this, you could go to Wikipedia and search up Shakespearean fool. And you can see, for example, in King Lear, there's this fool, and this is King Lear, another famous Shakespeare play. And here's a list of all the fools. You got Clown and Othello, and if we find Macbeth, where's Macbeth? There it is, the porter in Macbeth, the gravediggers in Hamlet. So every single play, basically, you see has a fool character. And so this is a comedic moment. You basically have a comedian that comes on and does a bit of a stand-up routine. And comedians in Shakespeare's time would often improvise. And so this version of it is interesting. It has knock-knock jokes because the knocking at the door, somebody's at the door of Macbeth's castle, and the porter's job is to let somebody in. But of course, last night there was a big party. Remember, the plan was to get everybody really drunk, and so the porter's really drunk. And so you have this sort of jokey routine with a porter. The other thing that I think is useful to know about before I start reading it is that there were these really popular plays during Shakespeare's time and especially earlier that were called mystery plays. They were old plays and they were religious plays. And there was a really famous religious play called The Harrowing of Hell. Oh, it sounds crazy, right? The Harrowing of Hell is a play that is about this idea that at the end of time, Jesus will go into hell and he will take some souls out. He will knock at the gate of hell and ask for some souls that are just there in limbo, in purgatory. And so there's a lot of famous depictions of it. Here's a depiction from 1504, from the 1430s. Remember, our play was written in 1606. And so there's a lot of really famous images of it. And there's some really famous play versions of it. And so this image of somebody's knocking at the gate is a really famous image from plays that people in Shakespeare's time would be familiar with, that somebody is knocking at the gate of hell. Because what happens in this scene is that this porter, all drunk, imagines that he's the doorman to hell. And so he hears the knocking, and he says, here's a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Hellgate, he should have old turning the key. Like he'll grow old turning the key. Because why? Well, because so many people are going to hell. Like there's so many bad people that he just will grow old. Keep on turning the key to let more and more people into hell. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there? Well, so we get that knock, knock. Who's there? That's the origin of the knock, knock joke. Here it is. Boom. Shakespeare invented it, and he says, who's there in the name of Beelzebub? Beelzebub is a name of the devil. There's a lot of names of the devil, and so you'll see later he talks about other devils' names, but there's a name of the devil. And he says, here's a farmer that hanged himself on the expectation of plenty. Okay, so now what happens is the porter is going to imagine different people entering hell. Like, he's the porter of Hellgate, and he's like, come on in. And who's the first guy? It's a farmer. And he hanged himself. So, because suicide is a sin in Christianity, he's in hell. And he's imagining that he hanged himself. Why? Because he thought he would get a lot. Now, this is kind of interesting because maybe this is related to Macbeth. Oh, because he hung himself on the expectation of plenty. He thought he would get a lot, but then he didn't get a lot, so he was disappointed. Come in time. Like, come on in. Have napkins enough about you. Here you'll sweat for it. So you see, like, this is enough for now, but it's really the word enough. But in other words, like, you better have some napkins because it's sweaty down here. And then we hear more knocking, and it's knock, knock. Who's there in the other devil's name? Oh, Faith. Faith here just means like well or hey. Here's an equivocator that could swear in both the scales against either scale, who committed treason enough for God's sake, yet could not equivocate to heaven. Now, this is another really important historical reference. And what's it a reference to? Well, it's a reference to this thing that happened in 1605. In November of 1605, somebody tried to kill the king. Not only that, but these guys tried to blow up Parliament and kill everybody in the government. And they were Catholics, and they wanted to kill the Parliament and convince and kill James and make England Catholic again. And there was this guy who was called Father Garnet. And Father Garnet wrote a book about how it's okay to lie if you're lying to serve Catholicism. And so he was widely blamed for the kind of behaviors that these Catholics did. That thing that happened in November 5th of 1605 is called the Gunpowder Plot. And so this reference is to the execution of this guy who came up with this Catholic idea that it's okay to lie in order, and maybe even to murder, in order to serve Catholicism. That is a really topical reference. And so you could see it's probably cut a lot, this equivocator line, but you get the idea that he's saying somebody who came to hell would lie in order to get whatever he wants, to swear in both scales against either scale, who committed treason. Oh, who committed treason? Macbeth just killed the king. He committed treason. And so you can see that actually this whole play is in a way a response to this gunpowder plot. And in fact, Shakespeare knew some of the people that were involved in trying to kill the king and blow up Parliament. Again, this was called the gunpowder plot. And it was, they arrested this guy on November 5th in the basement of Parliament that had been filled with gunpowder. And they were going to blow it up, and they were going to kill everybody. It would have been a crazy act of terrorism. And the guy they arrested, by the way, is where we get the word guy from. His name was Guy Fawkes, or Guido Fawkes. He was an Italian guy. Anyway, so he says, oh, come on in, equivocator. You're coming to hell too. So again, but though this is about a liar who committed treason. Who's that? Oh, Macbeth. And now we hear more knocking again. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there? Faith. Ah, here's an English tailor. Come hither for stealing out of a French hose. That's an English tailor who stole. Come in, tailor. Here you may roast your goose. Knock again. Knock, knock. Never at quiet. What are you? But this place is too cold for hell. I'll devil porter it no further. In other words, he's coming. He's going to answer the door. And but he's saying it's not hell because it's Scotland and it's really cold. And he says, I'll devil porter it. Well, this is just a made-up word, like I'll be the devil and the porter. I had thoughts to have let in some all professions that go the primrose way to the everlasting bonfire. So he's saying everybody goes, the primrose way is the easy path to the everlasting bonfire. Knock. Anon means I'm coming. Anon, anon, I pray you. Remember the porter. And then here comes Macduff. And Macduff is a very important character that we're just meeting now. And Macduff is the guy who's been knocking. And so remember, what I'm saying is that everybody in Shakespeare's time, when they hear about knocking at Hell's Gate, they would have this idea that the person that's knocking is Jesus. And so Macduff is immediately maybe a good guy. And in fact, he's going to be a good guy. And Macduff says, "Was it so late, friend, ere you went to bed, that you do lie so late?" Because they've been knocking a long time. So he's like, "Did you go to bed so late that you can't get up?" And the porter says, "Yeah, faith, sir. We were carousing." And carousing means getting drunk till the second cock. And the second cock is like the rooster started crowing. In other words, till morning. And he says, carousing is drinking. And so he says, and drink, sir, is a great provoker of three things. Like the porter is saying that drink causes three different things to happen. And remember, this is all joking. It's all a big joke. So it's like he's telling a joke. Like, have you heard about the three things that drinks cause? And Macduff says, what three things does drink especially provoke? And the porter says, marry, sir, nose painting, sleep, and urine. So what is it? Nose painting, in other words, it makes your face turn red. Makes your face turn red, makes you go to sleep, and it makes you pee. Lechery, sir, it provokes and unprovokes. Lechery is sexual lust. And so he's saying lust, sexuality, it provokes and it unprovokes. And remember, provokes means causes. So he's saying it causes and it doesn't cause. So that's confusing. And he says it provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance. So this is a joke, like about how drinking makes people want to have sex, but then not able to have sex. Therefore, he goes on, much drink may be said to be an equivocator with lechery. So here's another equivocator joke. And remember, equivocator is somebody who lies, but also isn't lying. Somebody who bends the truth, use ambiguous language so as to conceal the truth or avoid committing oneself. In other words, equivocating is when you lie but make it seem like you're not lying. So he says, drinking is like an equivocator with lechery because it makes you think you want to have sex, but then you can't. So it's lying to you. It makes him and it mars him. Mar is to damage. It sets him up and it takes him off. It persuades him and disheartens him. Make him stand to and not stand to. In conclusion, equivocates him in a sleep and giving him the lie leaves him. So here's a joke about how the word lie means to lie, like to be dishonest, but also to lie down. So it's like it makes you want to have sex, but it also makes you go to sleep. So it makes you lie to yourself. It lies to you about how you want to do something, but then you have to lie. Get it? And Macduff says, I believe drink gave thee the lie last night. And the porter says, that it did, sir, in the very throat on me. But I requited him for his lie, and I think, being too strong for him, though he took up my legs sometimes, yet I made a shift to cast him. So he's talking about drinking, that he lied in my throat, get it? But I got back at him. I required him for his lie, and being too strong, though he took up my legs like he lied me down, yet I made a shift in order to defeat him. So he's just making more jokes about how drinking made him lie down. And here comes Macbeth. And right then Macduff says, is thy master stirring? Our knocking has awakened him. Here he comes. And so here he comes. And this is a great scene now of really dramatic irony because we know what Macbeth just did. Macbeth knows what he just did, but these guys do not know, and they are about to find out. And Lennox says, good morrow, sir. And Macbeth says, good morrow both. Just good morrow means good morning. And Macduff says, is the king stirring, worthy Thane? Like, is the king around? And Macbeth says, not yet. And Macduff says, he did command me to call timely on him. I have almost slipped the hour. So apparently the king asked Macbeth to come and get him really early, and he's almost too late. He's almost slipped the hour. And Macbeth says, I'll bring you to him. Sorry. And Macduff says, I know this is a joyful trouble to you, but 'tis one. So he's like, it's just one thing that I'm asking you to do, and I know it's kind of a trouble. And Macbeth says something interesting. He says, the labor we delight in physics pain. Physics is medicine in Shakespeare. So it sounds like he's saying that doing this, taking you to see him, will be like medicine for my pain, which is interesting because also he's about to take him to see the horror that he's done. And he says, this is the door. And Macduff says, I'll make so bold to call, for 'tis my limited service. And then Macduff goes off, presumably to go see the dead body of the king. And Lennox keeps on talking to Macbeth, and he says, "Goes the king hence today?" And Macbeth says, "He does. He did appoint so." So this is interesting because it's like he lies, but then he equivocates. This is equivocation. You see, because he's saying he does he go today? Hence means goes the king hence today? Hence means from here in this context. So does the king go from here today? And Macbeth says, yeah, he does go from here, but then he changes it. He says he did appoint so. Like, yeah, he had planned on it, but now he's dead, so he can't. So this is a classic example of equivocation. Lennox says, the night has been unruly. Oh, this is interesting. Apparently, there's been a storm last night. It's been really unpleasant. He says, where we lay, our chimneys were blown down. And as they say, lamentings heard in the air, strange screams of death, and prophesying with accents terrible of dire combustion and confused events, new hatched to the woeful time. Oh, this is weird. Oh, apparently there's been a really strong wind or something, and chimneys were blown down, which must be really, and lamentings heard in the air. Lamentings are cries of grief, usually for the passing of somebody, for somebody dying, or intense grief. Strange screams of death. Oh, they were hearing strange screams of death last night. And prophesying. Prophesying is really witchcraft, or also predicting the future, with accents terrible, of dire combustion, of literally of things exploding, and confused events new hatched to the woeful time. And this is a really interesting, I wonder what this annotation says. I'm not sure what it is, newly produced, but there's a bird reference here. And there's going to continue with this obscure bird, which is an owl, which you almost never see because it's always in the dark. So it's new hatched to the woeful time. The obscure bird clamored the livelong night. They heard the owl all night. Some say the earth was feverish and did shake. Oh, apparently some people are saying there was an earthquake. And Macbeth is just like, yeah, it was a rough night. It was a rough night. And you could say that again for Macbeth. He killed somebody and he feels terrible. And Lennox says, my young remembrance cannot parallel a fellow to it. Like, I can't remember a time that was anything as bad as last night, which is really weird because we never heard anything about the weather, but apparently now it's been crazy. And Macduff now enters and he has seen it. He says, oh, horror, horror, horror. He's seen it. Tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee. Like, I can't say it, or even my heart can't say, cannot conceive. I can't even think about or name what is the horror. He's talking to the horror. And both Macbeth and Lennox say, what's the matter? But of course, Macbeth is just lying here. He's just acting. He knows what's the matter. And Lennox, though, is sincere. So that's a really nice parallel of an honest person and a dishonest person. And Macduff now has a really amazing image. He says, confusion now hath made his masterpiece. Confusion has made a masterpiece, which is a cool image. Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple and stole thence the life of the building. This is interesting. He's saying sacrilegious murder, sacrilege being like being against religion, like it's an unholy murder. It's broken open the Lord's temple and stole thence the life of the building. He's saying that the king is the Lord's temple. So he really worships the king. I don't know if it's because the king is such a good guy or he believes in the divine right of kings, like maybe Duncan was chosen as king by God. But whatever, Macduff is really upset. He thinks it's almost like God is dead, like Jesus is dead. And Macbeth says, what is it you say? The life? Of course, Macbeth knows what he's talking about. Look at all this dishonesty, all this equivocation. Lennox says, mean you his majesty? Like, do you mean the king? And Macduff says, approach the chamber and destroy your sight with a new gorgon. So a gorgon is like Medusa. It's an ancient creature that if you look at it, you turn to stone. So he's saying that the sight of Duncan is like a horrible monster that will destroy your eyes and actually turn you to stone. Do not bid me speak, see, and then speak yourselves. And Macbeth and Lennox go in to see the dead body. And Macduff says, awake, awake, ring the alarm bell, murder and treason. He wants to wake everybody up, ring the bell of the house, make everybody up. Banquo and Donalbain, Malcolm, awake, shake off this downy sleep, death's counterfeit. So everybody wake up. There's been murder and treason. And he calls to Banquo and Donalbain and Malcolm, remember Duncan's sons, get up, shake off this downy sleep, which he calls a death counterfeit, because there was this idea that sleep was like kind of death-like. Here he's saying death is a copy of sleep. So he's saying shake off what is like fake sleep and see real sleep. Up, up, and see the great doom's image. The doom is like the end of time. Malcolm, Banquo, as from your graves rise up and walk like sprites. Sprites are little fairies, so this is kind of a cool image. Like wake up like your little fairies from your graves. So that's another crazy image to countenance or to look at or to experience this horror. Ring the bell. And then we go doom, doom, doom. And Lady Macbeth comes in. And Lady Macbeth, of course, also knows what's going on. So she's also equivocating. She says, what's the business that such a hideous trumpet calls to parley the sleepers of the house? Speak, speak. Like, what's going on? As if you don't know. Macduff says, oh, gentle lady, 'tis not for you to hear what I can speak. And you really hear how this line slows down the meter because it's perfect iambic pentameter, and also how it's all one-syllable words. That's what Shakespeare can sometimes do, because it's all been crazy. He's yelling, and now he says, 'tis not for you to hear what I can speak. The repetition in a woman's ear would murder as it fell. So this is quite ironic, because he's saying, you're too much of a woman to hear what I would say to you, like what I have seen, that Duncan is dead, because it would murder you if you just heard it. That's how horrible it is. So this is a really funny, ironic moment, isn't it? And here comes Banquo. And Macduff says, oh, Banquo, Banquo, our royal master's murdered. And Lady Macbeth says, woe, alas, what? In our house? As if she didn't know. You see how evil this equivocation is that Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are doing. And Banquo says, too cruel anywhere, like in your house or anywhere. Dear Duff, so he calls him Duff like it's his friend. Apparently Banquo's good friends. And he says, I prithee contradict thyself. Prithee means please. So he's saying, please contradict yourself. Say that you're just lying. And say it is not so. And here comes Macbeth, Lennox, and Ross. And Macbeth says, had I but died an hour before this chance, I had lived a blessed time. For from this instance, there's nothing serious in mortality. Well, this is really interesting, because here he's also equivocating, but maybe there's something sincere about what he's saying. Because he's saying, if I had died an hour before this all had happened, I would have been happy. I would have lived a blessed time. But from this instance, there's nothing serious in mortality or life. All is but toys, like nothing matters to me now. Renown and grace is dead. Fame and grace being king is dead, pointless. The wine of life is drawn. When the wine is drawn, it's gone. So he's saying life is gone and the mere lees is left. So the lees is the part of the wine that's kind of got bits in it, so you don't even drink it. So he's saying all that's left of life is just the garbage, this vault to brag of. That's all that's left to even talk about. So that's really interesting that Macbeth, seeing Duncan here, is saying life is now pointless without him. Because that's what Macduff was saying, but maybe it's kind of true for how Macbeth feels. Maybe he really is now feeling like his life is pointless. So there's something quite honest, I think, about what he's saying here. And here comes Malcolm and Donalbain. And Malcolm says, what is amiss? Like, what's wrong? And Macbeth finishes his verse line so you can really hear it. It's what is amiss. You are and do not know it. And that's kind of like, you're amiss. And why are you amiss? Because your father's dead. The spring, the head, the fountain of your blood is stopped. The very source of it is stopped. So this is a cool image of like a father as being like a source of your blood. Like your father is where your blood kind of came from. And so we see like a kind of another meaning of blood here. And it's a really interesting image. And Macduff just spells it out for him. He says, your royal father's murdered. And Malcolm says, oh, by whom? So you see how they're again sharing these verse lines. They're all exclaiming. The verse is kind of going crazy. And Lennox says, those of his chamber, as it seemed. Oh, Now Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's plan seems to be working, because it seems like Malcolm is like, who did it? And Lennox says, oh, his chamber, like the people who were supposed to be guarding his door, as it seemed, had done it. Their hands and faces were all badged with blood, like they were covered with blood. So were their daggers, which unwiped we found upon their pillows. They stared and were distracted. No man's life was to be trusted with them. And so that kind of slows it back down. And we really hear that no man's life was to be trusted with them. And let me say that that is clearly true. They should not have been guarding the door because they got drunk. So they really did make a big mistake in putting these guys in, the king's life in these guys' hands, because they messed up too, even if they didn't kill him, as they were clearly framed, as we know. And Macbeth says, oh, yet I do repent me of my fury that I did kill them. Wait, what? Who did he kill? Oh, we just found out something important. Something big happened. When Macbeth and Lennox went out to go see Duncan, Macbeth killed the guards. This is a big mistake. And why did he do it? Well, that's Macduff's question. Wherefore did you do so? Why did you do that? And Macbeth has an interesting answer here. He says, who can be wise, amazed, temperate, and furious, loyal and neutral in a moment? No man. So he's saying, I did it because how could I be wise and amazed? Remember, in Shakespeare's time, amazed means confused, like you feel like trapped in a maze. Or remember when Macbeth felt rapt? Well, that's quite similar to this. So he's saying, who can be wise and amazed? Like, how can you think and be lost? How can you be temperate, like moderate or not intense, and also really angry? How can you be loyal and neutral at the same time? The expedition of my violent run love outran the pauser reason. So he's saying, like, it was like my violent love was running ahead of reason, which is supposed to pause your love. It couldn't make it. And so now he explains, he saw Duncan. Here lay Duncan. His, which is a cool image, by the way, the love outrunning reason. And here's another cool image. He says, here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gashed stabs look like a breach in nature for ruin's wasteful entrance. This is a cool image too. He's saying that when he looked at Duncan's body, it's like he had silver skin, and his blood, remember, look at this symbolism of blood, is golden because it's like from kings. And his gash stabs, those stabs, they look like a breach in nature, like something unnatural. And it's like a breach. A breach is like an opening for ruin's wasteful entrance, like the destruction of everything, ruin. And then there, the murderers, steeped in the colors of their trade, their daggers unmannerly breached with gore. So now this is a different meaning, breached meaning dressed up, and gore is blood. So he's saying that the daggers were dressed in his blood. And then who could refrain that had a heart to love, and in that heart, courage to make love's love known? And Lady Macbeth now faints. She says, help me hence, ho. And maybe Macbeth is getting pretty worked up here. It seems like maybe he's about to confess. I mean, he's kind of saying, like, how could I stop myself when I felt all these emotions? And he's talking about how beautiful Duncan's dead body is. This seems kind of messed up. And so Lady Macbeth is like, she pretends to faint. And then Macduff says, look to the lady. And everybody, you have to kind of imagine this on stage, that everybody on stage goes over to Lady Macbeth. Maybe she's on one side of the stage, except for Malcolm and Donalbain. So now Malcolm and Donalbain can have a conversation where everybody else, Macduff, Banquo, Macbeth, Lennox, Lady Macbeth, they can't hear it. So Malcolm looks to Donalbain and says, why do we hold our tongues that most may claim this argument for ours? Like, Malcolm is like, why don't we say something about all this, and why don't we claim the throne? And Donalbain says, what should be spoken here where our fate hid in an auger hole may rush and seize us? An auger hole is like a black hole, a small opening. And he's saying that their life is like in a small hole where at any time he's saying they're in big danger because their father's been murdered. And of course, they're in the next in line for the throne. So won't they be murdered? So he's like, let's get out of here. Let's away. Our tears are not yet brewed. Our tears are not yet brewed. Like brewed as in is in another alcohol reference. In other words, it's not made strong yet. Like we have to make our tears into something strong so we can get revenge. And Malcolm says, not our strong sorrow upon the foot of motion. Like, let's just get out of here. And Banquo says, look to the lady again, and let's go take care of the lady. And Lady Macbeth exits. Maybe she's helped off stage. And now Banquo says something interesting. He says, and when we have our naked frailties hid that suffer in exposure, let us meet and question this most bloody piece of work and know it further. Fears and scruples shake us. In the great hand of God I stand, and thence against this undivulged pretense I fight of treasonous malice. So, this is a lot of great imagery. What is he saying? He's saying, right now we're all scared and we're all exposed. So let's kind of take a break, and then we'll meet and ask questions about what caused this bloody piece of work to know it further. He's saying right now, fears and scruples are doubts or moral concerns are shaking us. We're all afraid. But he's going to stand in the great hand of God. He's going to ask God for help. And then against this undivulged pretense. Undivulged means hidden, and pretense means show. Like there's something hiding. And he's saying, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight this treasonous malice. Treason, again, is against the king, and malice is anger. And Macduff is with him, he says, and so do I. And everybody says, so all. So Macbeth says, let's briefly put on manly readiness and meet in the hall together. So let's get ready to really confront this and go meet in the hall. And the hall here isn't like the hallway, but it's more like like the great meeting room. I just need to pause it for a second, sorry. And so and then they all exit but Malcolm and Donalbain. And Malcolm says, what will you do to Donalbain, to his brother? Let's not consort with them. And consort means meet. Like, let's not go into the hall and meet with them. To show an unfelt sorrow is an office which the false man does easy. I'll go to England. So what is he saying? He's like, let's not meet with them, because to pretend like you're really sad is something that only a false man does easily. Like, that's what we saw Lady Macbeth doing. She was putting on an unfelt sorrow. It was fake. And that's why she's false. So he's like, I'm not going to go in there and just pretend anything. I'm angry, and I know somebody there is responsible. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to England. And Donalbain says, all right, I'm going to go to Ireland. To Ireland our separate fortune shall keep us both the safer. Like, we'll keep safer if we're separate. And maybe here we get a sense that they don't trust each other. Because Malcolm was just crowned king. So maybe Donalbain isn't like, I don't want to go with you. I don't trust that. I'm going to go separate, where we'll both be safer. Where we are, there's daggers in men's smiles. What a great image. What a great image, that there's daggers in men's smiles. You can't trust anybody, because the smiles that people have are full of violence. The near in blood, the nearer bloody. Oh, so now we're starting to get a lot of wordplay on blood. Because remember, blood means family. Like, the closer in family, the more violent. So really here, he's almost saying, like, I don't trust you. And Malcolm just says, this murderous shaft that's shot hath not yet lighted. This is an archery image. He's saying the murderous arrow that's been shot haven't landed yet, and our safest way is to avoid the aim. Like, let's get out of here. Let's therefore to horse. Let's go on horse, and let us not be dainty of leave taking. Let's not be delicate. Let's just get out of here, but shift away. There's warrant in that theft which steals itself when there's no mercy left. So here's something interesting, because he's saying stealing is allowed if you're stealing yourself and there's nobody around you to be merciful. All right, well,